almost all the way back to the Champion House itself. In the front yard of Pemberton's headquarters is the commanding general himself, with his straw hat in hand, waving it to the troops, cheering them on. One Missourian, a fellow by the name of Robert Bevier, records that a group of ladies were also standing in the front yard of the commanding general's headquarters. Where they came from, he never knew. But a group of ladies were standing there singing Dixie to inspire the troops. And he said, I couldn't help but hallowing just once in recognition of the fair sex. But as they raced past Pemberton's headquarters, with Cockrell's brigade in the lead to further inspire his troops, Cockrell has the reins of his horse in his mouth, a sword in one hand held high and a magnolia blossom in the other. Well, the Missourians and the troops of Greene's brigade will load their weapons on the run, slam into the Federals here, and drive to the crest of Champion Hill and beyond. And so the Crossroads once again falls into Confederate hands. The troops of Lee's brigade, Cummings's brigade, Barton's brigade, portions of them at least, will all join in this counterattack. And so this area by early afternoon is once again in firm Confederate control. But the time is now around 2 o'clock when Bowen launches his counterattack, and by 2:30 they're in possession of Champion Hill. By 3 o'clock they're in the vicinity of the Champion House itself. But at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, you'll recall John McClernand over here receives the orders to press the attack with all possible speed. And so around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and let me get my right map here, we have the Federals. Let's orient us as we are here. We have the Federals under McClernand pushing down off the high ground you can see in the distance, overwhelming the Confederate roadblock and closing on this crossroads. Now Bowen, who is desperately fighting to keep the initiative alive on the other side of Champion Hill, suddenly can hear firing intensifying to his right rear in this area. And he realizes that the Confederate roadblock has been overwhelmed. If these Federals advancing along the middle road make it to these crossroads before he does, his entire division is isolated and cut off. Bowen has no recourse but to order the withdrawal from the field of battle. So although his counterattack has been highly successful, not properly supported, but highly successful, he reluctantly gives the orders for his men to fall back. Now at first the retrograde is fairly ordered, but it's not long before Bowen's troops are completely out of ammunition. The cry goes out for ammunition all along the line. Bowen will send a courier back calling up fresh supplies and munitions. But where are the wagons?
On the way back.
Wagons are way over there on their way back to Vicksburg. There are no fresh supplies and munitions to be had. Although they rifle through the cartridge boxes of the dead and wounded Union and Confederate soldiers alike, there are precious few cartridges to be had, and so the retreat begins to deteriorate from one of an orderly retreat into disorganized and finally into panic as these Confederates coming back over the crest of Champion Hill can see down to the crossroads and see the Federals pushing along the middle road. They realize the danger they are in. They begin casting aside their rifle muskets, their accoutrements, and running as fast as they can. And by the time they come down off of Champion Hill and are racing across this crossroads here, as Ed Bars likens it, it's like ducks in a shooting gallery. The Federals lined up all along the front here, just picking off these soldiers as they race across their front. Bowen's command, in a greatly demoralized fashion, will race down the road in this direction, followed by the troops of Barton and Cumming and Lee. By this time, the lower ford is open, and the entire Confederate army will stream down this road back toward the lower road and the crossings of Baker's Creek. The Federals under McClernand's command, who will now take control of this crossroads, will split. Some will follow the retreating Confederates down here, while others will vigorously push along the Jackson Road across the upper crossing of Baker's Creek and then turn south, trying to bag Pemberton's army before it can get across the rain-swollen stream. The Battle of Champion Hill is a disastrous engagement for the Confederate forces. As mentioned, their casualties here are in excess of 3,000 men out of the 22 to 25,000 engaged, and they will lose 28 pieces of artillery here at Champion Hill. For those of, allow me to mention while we're on this road, Today this is called the D.J. Johnson Road. It's recently been paved with this chip and seal surface type material. Up until just a few years ago, this was all a dirt road, and the only home out here was this house, which is the home of Mr. D.J. Johnson, to whom the road is now named. Pemberton's headquarters was still standing when I first came here 27 years ago. In fact, it was lived in by Mr. D.J. Johnson and his family. They since have built this newer home and have moved into it. The Isaac Roberts house was completely abandoned. About 7 years ago, it finally just collapsed in on itself. And nowadays, the only trace of that building is a cistern. Also, the grave of Isaac Roberts and his wife Sarah are there, but cattle grazing in the area have knocked the stones over, have tramped on them repeatedly, breaking them into small pieces, and it's been several years since I found any trace of the headstones marking the graves of those two souls. But the only thing left of the Isaac Roberts house is the cistern. But up until just a few years ago, that building could have been saved and preserved for posterity. So as you can see, slowly but surely, the historical resources associated with the battle at Champion Hill, be it the Isaac Roberts house, be it the Iser house that the owner wants to get rid of, or the Coker house that's falling down, we're slowly but surely losing each and every one of them. I hope that the state, utilizing that generous gift from the Conservation Fund of 823 acres, will be able to move somewhat rapidly to better protect these resources and safeguard them for future generations. But it's going to take a private-public partnership, I'm sure. I'm hoping this Vicksburg Campaign study will help shed light on that and get Congress activated. I'm hoping also that the Civil War Preservation Trust, by putting this on their 10 most endangered list, will spark Civil War folks such as yourself nationwide into a letter writing campaign to members of the Congress seeking to protect this battlefield. But anyway, those of you who are brave souls and don't mind walking up through the grass over there, we'll walk to the crest of Champion Hill. Yes, ma'am.
Carr, when did Carr come into this on Champion Hill? Was it late in the afternoon?
You have two divisions here on the middle road. These divisions of the 13th Corps are commanded by Peter Osterhaus and Eugene Carr. Osterhaus will be in the lead, followed by Carr. And so Carr's men will not get engaged until late in the afternoon. You recall that the order to advance arrives around 2 o'clock. By 2:15, 2:30, Osterhaus's division is on the march, followed by Carr. Carr won't see any heavy action probably until around 4 o'clock after he sweeps through this Crossroads area and is sent in pursuit of the Confederates. Okay?
With the troops coming. You know what, Carl? We had a marker, we put a happy face on it. That's right.
We are parked down here at the Crossroads. We have walked up the historic trace of the Jackson Road here to the crest of Champion Hill. Running off to your left is what we call Lee's Ridge. And it's out along this ridge that Stephen D. Lee would deploy his Alabama Brigade. Later on, Alfred Cummings' Georgia Brigade would move into position here, continue on with the shifting to the left. So part of Cummings' brigade will be facing north toward the enemy at Champion House. Part of it will be facing east, paralleling the Jackson Road. Up here on the crest of the hill are two guns of the Virginia Botetourt artillery. Now in the 1930s, the Champion family, as with most families across America, certainly most families across Mississippi, fell on very hard times during the Great Depression. To keep the family alive, they sold graveling rights to their property. And so the crest of Champion Hill was excavated for gravel. And you see the bowl right here. The crest of the hill historically is explained to me by Sid Champion IV, who got it from his grandmother, who was the Mrs. Champion of the Civil War era, said it would have been about at the top of that pine tree in front of you. So that gives you some idea of how much the hill has been excavated.
Oh, so this isn't original, I mean this isn't...
Well, this is Champion Hill,
Yeah,
but the crest was there, not here. Now, although that has been carted off, and that has been one of the major reasons why Civil War historians have not supported this becoming a national military park, my counterpoint to that is, hey, all you need is a couple truckloads of dirt, you can restore it. We have the maps of the time period, we know what the contours were. You know, if need be, this could be restored. But I still think, as it is right now, most of the rest of the field maintains its historic appearance. And so the integrity is 95 to 98% intact. Why not make it a national military park? Pardon me?
How wooded was
The question is, how wooded was this at the time? According to Francis Obenchain, the commander of the Virginia battery, whose 2 guns would be positioned atop the crest of the hill, the east side was open, as was the view to the north. And you can see here on the map, these maps, by the way, done by the U.S. Army Command and General Staff College at Fort Leavenworth, are based on maps compiled by Ed Bars back in the 1950s that are in our park collection. And of course, Ed took not only historical maps, but Ed was one of the first people to really delve into oral histories. And as Ed will tell you, he spent years just going around with people who delivered bread and milk and various other sundry items to all these little mom and pop grocery stores throughout the community, because these grocery stores were where people gathered to talk and play checkers and buy a pop or have a beer and talk to their neighbors. And as a result, he met so many people whose families dated back to the time period of the Civil War, so many people who could tell you not firsthand, but one generation removed, the stories they heard from their parents. And so he compiled these maps and knew pretty good where the forests were, where the open fields were. So here is the crest of Champion Hill itself. You can see it's relatively clear to the east on the other side of the road for a while, and certainly clear all the way to the north to the Champion House. So from the crest of this hill, the men of the Botetourt, Virginia, could actually see the Champion House and saw as the head of the Union column rounded this bend and deployed in line of battle. Okay.
Terry, what
Ma'am.
do they think? It's about 800 feet high, or do they have?
I think it's 800. I think it's 800 feet.
So it would be like the
not
highest
quite sure.
vantage point in this whole
Oh,
area?
without question. Yes, ma'am. Most dominant geographic feature of the area. Without question. So the Confederates are initially up here. Lee's Alabamians, Alfred Cummings' Georgians, and the 2 guns of the Botetourt artillery, when they see the Federals deploy in line of battle and extend their lines to the left, but primarily to the right. So as a result, Lee would shift farther to his left to compensate when gaps suddenly appeared between his brigade and Alfred Cumming, and gaps appeared between the different regiments of his brigade. The Federals would launch that attack shortly after 10 o'clock in the morning, with George McGinnis of the Indiana Brigade with his sword held high above the troops, and as they neared the base of the hill, he dropped his sword to the ground, the volley went harmlessly overhead, and the Yanks were in among the Confederates. They would battle them severely for a while, driving them slowly, inexorably back over the crest of Champion Hill and down toward the Crossroads. Now, Obenchain of the Botetourt artillery talks about in his letters switching from shell, which is long distance firing toward the Champion House, to canister, to double canister, and still the enemy kept charging the guns. Finally, they overwhelmed the guns of the Virginia battery by shooting at all the horses, killing the artillery horses so they couldn't withdraw the guns, and all 4 of these guns, 2 of the Virginia battery, 2 of Waddell's Alabama battery, fell into the Confederate hands. He said in that moment of victory, the Yanks let out a mighty cheer and began tossing their hats into the air, that they also were bayoneting what few horses were left. He thought the Yanks had gone crazy, and in his letters he wrote, "I begged them not to bayonet the men." But in the excitement of victory, with their hats being thrown in the air, he said they didn't pay me any particular attention. And so he and Captain John Johnston simply slid down the hill behind us here, where their horses were tied to a tree, mounted their horses, and rode off. Johnston rode toward Baker's Creek. Obenchain rode to the south past the Crossroads and beyond, where he came across General Pemberton. He said that the commanding general was sitting on the porch in front of his headquarters, most dejected look on his face. Obenchain rode up to him, saluted, and recounted the situation on the hill, saying, "My guns are lost." To which General Pemberton replied, "Don't worry, we're going to get them back. I have ordered General Bowen to counterattack." And very shortly after that, Obenchain recalls seeing Bowen coming up the road, sweeping past the Crossroads. Here on the crest of Champion Hill at that time was George McGinnis, the brigade commander who had captured the hill. He said he heard a mighty cheer, and as he looked down in the distance toward the Crossroads, he saw what he referred to as a tidal wave of gray sweeping over the Crossroads and advancing toward his position. He said it so unnerved him that the hair on the back of his neck stood straight up. And in just a moment, he said it was like trying to stop a wave with a broom. They simply swept over the hill and push the Federal soldiers back toward the Champion House itself. They get so close to the Champion House they could actually see the home. They could see General Grant, according to some Confederate soldiers, ordering the wagons turned about, pushed into the ditches on the side of the road, anything that will clear the roads, enabling them to bring up fresh infantry in the form of Crocker's division. Well, Crocker's division would arrive on the scene, deploy his troops in line of battle, and stave the Confederate attack. The refugees of Hovey's division and Logan's division farther to the right would regroup. With the counterattack checked, the Federals would once again advance toward the hill. Bowen, knowing that Loring has been ordered to his support, is desperately trying to hold on to his position. He's fighting for every inch of ground, trying to maintain his position long enough for Loring to arrive, at which time he hopes not only to solidify his position, but resume the counterattack and hopefully split the Union Army in two. But as he's fighting to maintain his position here, suddenly the cry goes up for ammunition. There is no ammunition to be had, and so they rifle through the cartridge boxes of the dead and wounded Union and Confederate soldiers alike. They get only a handful of cartridges. But by this time it's now around 2:30, going on 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and Bowen can suddenly hear the sound of firing erupting to his right rear. That's McClernand breaking through the roadblock. He realizes the game is up. Without any sign of Loring coming to his aid, Bowen realizes that if those Federals make it to the crossroad before his division can make it, his division is lost. So he reluctantly gives the order to fall back. But this retreat turns into a rout as men begin to panic. With no ammunition on hand, Federals shooting into their backs, seeing the Federals in their front and off to their left side reaching the crossroads, these men just throw their weapons aside and run as fast as they can toward that crossroads. The majority of them make it, but a handful of Bowen's troops are cut off and captured at that point. The hill will fall into Federal hands and remain in Federal hands for the duration of this conflict. Any questions you'd like to ask here on the crest of the hill itself?
You mentioned something about send in a...
Send, Ed Barrs refers to the two Georgia brigades, Alfred Cummings' brigade here and Seth Barton's brigade farther to the Confederate left, as having sinned badly. That's Ed's word.
Was there any type of atrocity that...
No, not at all. It's
there
just
wasn't
that
time for that,
they
was there?
performed poorly, is what he's saying. They performed poorly. Now, in Cummings' defense, Alfred Cumming is brand new to brigade command. This brigade of Georgians had originally been commanded by General Thomas Taylor. Taylor had been elevated to Pemberton's staff just 3 days prior to the Battle of Champion Hill. Thus, just 2 days before the battle, Alfred Cumming assumes command of this brigade. He doesn't even know the names of his colonels yet, and yet here he is thrown into the most important struggle of the Vicksburg Campaign. Now Barton, on the other hand, Barton's brigade of Georgians, Seth Barton, by the way, does go on to become an engineer in Robert E. Lee's army. It will be Seth Barton who constructs the mule shoe at Spotsylvania, for example. But Barton's brigade, moving from the Ratliff Plantation Road on the dead run behind the line of Lee's brigade, will assume position on the Confederate left. They will actually launch an attack at that point, but quickly be checked and then overwhelmed by John Stevenson's brigade and driven from the field. I personally don't find any fault with those Georgians other than the fact that they weren't in position very long before they were overwhelmed. I don't know why Ed refers to them as having sinned badly, but Ed dislikes those two Georgia brigades. Doesn't think they perform very admirably here at all. Sir?
How big was the crest actually up here?
Well, as mentioned, the crest would go to about the top of this tree up here.
Right.
When the foliage is down, you can actually see the entire bowl. Okay. I'm no judge of distance, I'm sorry to say. You see that last tree in the distance there that you can see clearly?
Right.
That's on the other side of the bowl right there.
I see.
Okay.
So this is
So that's already on the downward slope there.
okay. Just it's pretty big.
Oh, it's a good size hill. Yeah, good size hill.
Could Loring have made much of a difference?
Could Loring have made much of a difference? That's difficult to say. Loring does have 3 brigades, but of those 3 brigades, one has to be left behind to guard that lower road, and that's Tillman's brigade. And so Loring only advances with 2 brigades, those of Featherston and I'll think of the other one. He only has 2 brigades though. Both are under strength. Loring, however, is an aggressive officer by and large. He likes to fight. It's a possibility that with Loring, coupled with Bowen all at the same time, may have been able to pierce the center of the Union line here at the Champion House. Without fresh supplies and munitions, they could not have sustained themselves in the field very long. And so it all, in that scenario, it all would have depended on how panicked the Federals became. Now, you have James McPherson on the scene, the Corps commander. I don't see much activity on the part of James McPherson, personally. I think that McPherson, aware of his inexperience, knowing that the Army commander is in his presence, simply relegates any activity to the Army commander. James McPherson is a non-entity here at Champion Hill. Grant, on the other hand, having this inexperienced Corps commander, not knowing what McPherson's doing, in fact McPherson doesn't do much, Grant actually comes down a step, if you will, and rather than act as an Army commander, suddenly he's acting as a Corps commander, or even lower, directing troops into battle, ordering the wagons out of the way. That's not the responsibility of an Army commander. But Grant, as all of you know, is stoic. I have never known U.S. Grant to get disturbed or upset. I think that his calm would have maintained calm and discipline among the Army, even had Loring and Bowen been able to form a temporary piercing of the center of the Union line. And plus he had fresh troops in the form of Crocker's division on hand that could have easily been pushed to the front. So I don't think it would have made that big of a difference. You'll find many Southern writers talk about what if, only if Loring had shown up, but I don't think it would have made much of a difference. Okay. Okie doke, folks, let's head back to the bus. Our next stop will be the Big Black River Bridge.
Terry, who put up the flag here?
Exactly who does that I don't know, but it's seldom do you ever come up on the hill and there's not a Confederate flag up there somewhere. Sometimes it's over there, sometimes it's over there, sometimes it's up in a tree, but there's always a Confederate flag out. I don't know if that's young Sid himself or not.
Fill that in. Now, the road, was it always running along the Champion Hill?
Yeah, and then from here it curves slightly to the right and goes to the Champion House.
Goes up to it?
Oh, it goes straight to that. No, it from here.
Road go
Yeah, it would go up. There would be a road cut. There would be a road cut here at Champion Hill.
all the way to the top of the hill.
Continue going up and through the cut and start descending and curving around.
Okay, so it actually does go up the hill.
Wave.
We're sitting in Champion Hill, folks. This is also auto video. Right?
That's right. That's right. This is definite proof that you were here. Most definitely. What if?
We'll look for you in that certain place, okay?
Okay, how you doing?
Thanks.
How you doing, sir?
We overtook you fine.
Need some maps and all?
No, no.
Do you need maps?
Okay.
Take care, Ed.
Okay.
Okay, tomorrow. Okay, you gonna be in the park tomorrow?
Yeah.
Oh, very good. Very
I think
good.
he can get by. He's getting by, I think. Okay, see, I think he's going to get, your hair's getting longer. Yeah.
I know. I see that.
And she said,
Folks, you're in trouble now.
what year? Right
Ed Barge was asking me how many didn't go up the hill.
Did or didn't?
He's going to come on and lecture you folks. He didn't go up the hill. He wants you to run up now.
You ready to go?
We're in serious trouble.
There's a Marine Corps.
Did he really find the boy?
I told Eddie it was too late. The battle was already over.
Terry, did you find a mini ball?
What I found looked just like a mini ball, a flattened mini ball, but it was a stone.
Oh, okay.
Gave it.
Yes, sir.
Don's got it.
Oh, I gave it to Don. Well, I was just going to say, we have a guy who's really into that. You know, it'd be nice to give it to him.
Oh, I would gladly do so had it been a mini ball.
Uh-huh.
You know, when I was a little boy, they told me there was a Santa Claus.
And a few years later, they told me there wasn't, and I was so disappointed. And from that day on, I don't believe anybody about nothing.
Folks, following the successful Union attack late in the day, as Bowen's command, Stevenson's command, and Loring's division are all reeling in retreat toward the lower crossing, Union forces pushing over the crest of Champion Hill and those under McClernand pushing down the middle road. Some would follow in pursuit of the Confederates in that direction. Others would follow along the Jackson Road just as we are moving now and would cross over at the upper crossing of Baker's Creek. We will follow the route of the pursuing Federals into the town of Edwards, and from that point we'll follow the retreating Confederates to Big Black River Bridge and the route of advance of the 13th Army Corps the following day, May 17th. As we move along, I've been asked to talk just briefly about Army organization and numbers.
What?
I never like playing the number games because numbers change on a daily basis in the armies. But the standard formation of the Army is a regiment. A regiment with a state designation, in most cases normally something like the 31st Illinois, the 19th Kentucky, the 27th Alabama, and so on. These regiments were virtually the same size on paper when fully recruited. Fully recruited consisted of 1,010 officers and enlisted men broken into 10 companies. 2 or more regiments normally made up a brigade. 2 or more brigades normally made up a division. 2 or more divisions made up an Army Corps. 2 or more corps would make up an army. Now here during the Vicksburg Campaign, the Confederate Army of Vicksburg did not have a corps organization. Rather, the Army of Vicksburg under Lieutenant General John Pemberton consisted of 5 divisions. 5 divisions. They were commanded by William W. Loring, Carter Stevenson, John Bowen, John Forney, and Martin Luther Smith. The field army under Pemberton's command that we've been talking about here all afternoon at Champion Hill consisted of only 3 divisions. When Pemberton left Vicksburg to go out to do battle with Grant in the field, he took with him only 3 of his 5 divisions, leaving 2 divisions in Vicksburg to man the river batteries and fortifications against any attempted landing by the United States Navy. Now, perhaps Pemberton could have gotten away with fewer troops in Vicksburg and yet provided adequately for defense of the city. We'll never know, but certainly a division or 2 more with him here at Champion Hill could clearly have made a big difference in the story of the battle and the story of the Vicksburg Campaign. But it's a moot point at this stage. The Union Army of the Tennessee under General Grant's command did have a corps organization, as we know. And we've talked about those 3 corps, the 13th Corps under McClernand, the 15th Corps under Sherman, and the 17th Corps under James McPherson. And so Union armies, by and large, be they in the Eastern Theater of Operations or in the Western Theater of Operations, did have corps structure. Confederate armies, by and large, did not until later in the war. It's not until late 1862, for example, that the Army of Northern Virginia decides to develop a corps structure. It's not until even later that the Confederate Army of Tennessee under Braxton Bragg develops a corps structure.
We'll turn left here.
Now, in terms of numbers, let me use some of the Eastern figures for comparison. You take a look at the Army Corps with the Army of the Potomac and the Battle of Gettysburg, for example. Those corps ranged in size anywhere from around 5,000 soldiers to around 12,000 soldiers. Normally, a Union Army Corps in the Army of the Potomac was roughly the size of a Confederate division, a large Confederate division, like Robert Rodes' division at Gettysburg, the largest division in the Confederate Army, had 8,000 soldiers in it, fully the size of a Union Army Corps, in some cases even bigger than some of the Union Army Corps. Here we are continuing along the Jackson Road. We will soon be coming to the upper crossing of Baker's Creek. You recall the Federals under John Stevenson do capture this bridge late on the morning of May 16th, but are forced to relinquish their hold on this bridge thanks to the counterattack by John Bowen's Confederates. The Federals will regain control of this bridge late on the afternoon of May 16th, somewhere around 4 to 4:30 in the afternoon. Once they have possession of this bridge in the afternoon, Union soldiers pushing across this bridge as well as the railroad trestle off to your right will immediately turn south and parallel Baker's Creek, moving toward the lower crossing where all the Confederates are streaming across this creek. As the Federal forces push down the valley of Baker's Creek, they come within artillery range of the lower crossing and immediately unlimber artillery and bring that crossing under fire. General Bowen, whose troops are helping to hold that bridge, first of all, let me go back. Stevenson's division, the Confederate division, will be the first to yield the field. They will cross over the creek and stream back through Edwards toward the line of the Big Black River. They have been badly mauled, badly mauled. They have no fighting edge left whatsoever. So they're just streaming to the rear in a very disorganized fashion. Bowen's division, although it too has been badly mauled, still retains its fighting edge. Bowen's 2 brigades, once they cross over Baker's Creek, will take up a blocking position to hold that crossing long enough for Loring's division to make good its escape. It will be Bowen's division that will come under fire of the Union artillery pushing down this side of Baker's Creek. At that point in time, Bowen will send a frantic note. Bowen will send a frantic note to William Loring, imploring him to hurry. For God's sake, hurry. I cannot hold much longer. As the Federals continue their advance down the valley of Baker's Creek and come within musketry range of Bowen's command, Bowen will send a second message to Loring saying, I cannot hold any longer. Save your division as best you can. And Bowen will take up the line of march back toward Edwards. Loring's division will begin its crossing of Baker's Creek. The 12th Louisiana Infantry of Loring's division will cross the creek to this side, but coming under strong Union artillery fire and musketry, Loring realizes that his division is not going to make it, at least not in its entirety, probably not even half will make it across. Wishing to maintain the cohesiveness of his division, he will pull the 12th Louisiana back to the east side of the creek, and thanks to a local guide, direct his division southward, safeguarding his division. But the Federals will turn south in hot pursuit of Loring. To put greater distance between his division and the pursuing Federals, he will abandon his artillery and cut the traces. The Federals will seize his artillery. Pleased with the prize that they have just captured, the pursuit is stopped. And so Loring's division will continue marching through the night, initially in hopes of finding a suitable crossing point of Baker's Creek to make it back to Edwards on your right. But shortly after the sun goes down, the night sky is ablaze from fires in Edwards. He believes it to be Federal forces burning the town. But contrary to his belief, it's actually the Confederates setting fire to all their commissary supplies, quartermaster stores, and ordnance supplies that had been stockpiled in Edwards that day. With the night sky ablaze, Loring believes Edwards to be in Federal hands, and so he will abandon any idea of trying to rejoin up with Pemberton's force. Rather, his force will march steadily through the night and all day the next day, and finally the next evening pull into Crystal Springs, Mississippi on the railroad leading up from New Orleans. From there he'll follow along the line of the railroad northward to Jackson, and his division, utterly fagged out, badly straggling, will then become a nucleus on which Joseph E. Johnston builds his so-called Army of Relief that we'll talk about at length tomorrow. The Confederate commander, John Pemberton, is unaware of the fact that Loring's division is cut off. Pemberton himself has left the field in the early stages of the rout. He has followed back through the town of Edwards to the line of the Big Black River and even beyond. He tells Stevenson's division to simply cross the Big Black River and bivouac at any place of his choosing. Many of those Confederates in Stevenson's division will not even bivouac that night. Rather, they'll race all the way back to the fortifications of Vicksburg before they finally stop. Bowen's division is ordered to move to the fortifications on the east side of Big Black River. There, take up a position in those fortifications and hold the bridge across the river long enough for Loring's division to cross. Steadily through the night, Bowen's men wind their way over the muddy roads and into the fortifications of Big Black. Finally, around 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, a deathly silence settles over the field. But with the rising sun, rather than Loring's division arrive, it is the Federals under John McClernand, the commander of the 13th Corps, and the Federals will launch an attack that we'll talk about here in just a few moments. Yes, ma'am?
So it was, if they went through the night the next day, then Loring got back around, what, May 19th to Crystal Springs?
Let's see, today's the 16th.
No, I thought it was the 17th.
He'll get into Crystal Springs, I think, on the 18th, late at night on the 18th. And then from there, I think it takes him another 2 days to march back into Jackson. Okay, so he gets back into Jackson somewhere around the 20th of May. But don't quote me on that date.
We'll turn right here.
This is the lower crossing of Baker's Creek once again. This is going to be the sole avenue of escape for the Confederate forces. And so Carter Stevenson, followed by John Bowen, will stream across the river at the creek at that point and fall back into Edwards along the very road we are now taking. As we ascend the high ground here and start going down the other side, the village of Edwards will come into view. Now, Edwards is a town that was incorporated, somewhere around 1826. Became a popular stop on the railroad. Once the railroad came through here in the 1830s, it really helped Edwards grow considerably, as local farmers would then bring their cotton and other supplies to Edwards for placement on the railroad and shipping it on to Vicksburg, where it had access to the Mississippi River. So Edwards was actually a thriving little community in the 1860s. But the Civil War and the Reconstruction period that followed was very hard on Edwards. It never really fully recovered. Throughout the 1900s, Edwards made a slow comeback until the Great Depression, but following the Great Depression, this town has been on a steady decline. Edwards today, unfortunately, has somewhere around 98% unemployment. There's not a single business other than the bank operating in downtown Edwards, and much of downtown Edwards has been consumed by a number of fires over the years. We'll go through the downtown area here in just a moment. Just off to your left is an area referred to as Withers Heights. It is here that Confederate Colonel William Withers had his plantation. William Withers became colonel of the 1st Mississippi Light Artillery. It's the largest artillery outfit in the Confederate Army. It comprised a number of batteries. Several of those batteries, I think 7 or 8 of them, are in the Vicksburg Campaign. The other 4 or 5 are in position down in Port Hudson, Louisiana. But it's the single largest artillery unit in Confederate service. William Withers' plantation that covered this whole area was a large cotton growing facility. His cotton gins and barns were full with the white gold of the lower Mississippi Valley. To prevent that cotton from falling into federal hands, on the night of May the 16th, the Confederates set Withers' plantation on fire, and it was completely consumed by the flame. In the post-Civil War era, Colonel Withers moved to a different house in town. That house is still standing, and it's up here on the hill to your right. You can't see it right now, however.
Just in here, turn left.
Let's see it. The double chimneys.
Turn left here, and then right.
Looks like it's 3 stories.
They have a bridge up there that's rusted. They have to go over it all. That looks like
Terry? Champions Hill, the battle. What did the North call it? Did they call it Champions Hill too, or?
The question dealt with the Battle of Champion Hill. It's also known as the Battle of Baker's Creek. It is the Union Army that would call it Champion Hill. The Confederates would call it Baker's Creek. Normally the Federals refer to them by streams, but in this case they referred to it the most dominant feature of the battlefield, Champion Hill itself. This is downtown Edwards, folks. For those of you who ever saw the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? This is the closing scene of the movie, right here in the main street of Edwards.
Really?
As you can see, there's not much here at all today. Most of these businesses have closed. In fact, there was one period in time where every single one of these buildings was a bar. That was the only thing in Edwards was a bar where people drank their unemployment in sorrow. But here you see all this was destroyed by fire within the decade of the 1990s.
Sal would like to see this.
Oh, we gotta show this to Sal.
Who owns that mansion up there with the yellow and the...
That particular mansion is a college of music. I forget it's Rare and Ancient Music College or something like that.
This is over here, the yellow one.
There's the railroad track.
And Colonel Withers' house is behind it.
Huh?
Now what artillery number did you say was Withers?
Number 1.
Number 1.
First Mississippi Light.
First Mississippi Light.
As the Confederate streamed through the town of Edwards, you see the railroad. That's the Southern Railroad of Mississippi. That's what really gave rise to the town's wealth in the mid-1800s. The Confederates streamed through the town, setting the railroad cars on fire that contained commissary supplies and quartermaster stores and even some ordnance. Then they turned left on this road, which is the direct road to Vicksburg. About 3 miles down this road, they would come to the Big Black River fortifications. Federal troops,
Bona fide.
very pleased with their victory, did occupy the town of Edwards that night. Some units were continued in pursuit down this road that we are now following, but for all intents and purposes, the action would cease. The Federals would spend the remainder of the night trying to police the battlefield and get some rest. But early on the morning of May the 17th, the Army is up at an early hour and back on the road. Grant is anxious to finish the business that had been started here at Champion Hill on May 16th, namely the destruction of Pemberton's field army before it could fall back into Vicksburg. Now, Grant is aware of the fact of the Big Black River, that there is a bridge across the river at that point, and he recognizes that the Confederates will utilize that bridge in their retreat, which will slow them down considerably due to the narrow nature of that bridge. What he hopes to do is have a rapid enough pursuit to catch the Confederates while they're still on this side of the river, draw them into battle, and keep them pinned on this side of the river, while General Sherman, hastening from Jackson and Clinton with the Army's pontoon train, can cross the river off to your right at a place called Bridgeport. Hopefully they can make a rapid march, lay the bridge, cross over the Big Black River, and move around in rear of Pemberton's army, cutting its only avenue of retreat into Vicksburg. But events would move far faster than William Sherman, and the Battle of Big Black River Bridge will be fought and won by McClernand long before Sherman ever reaches the Big Black River. How are we doing time-wise?
Can have it for.
You milk people.
It's 4:45 already? Yeah. Okay. I'll get you back. 5:30.
We supposed to do that set.
Don't worry, get back.
I'll have back around 5. We just have one stop left.
We don't have to go for 2 blocks.
Can have it.
Yeah, well, you're right. You're right.
There's Whitey's. There's Whitey's. There's Whitey's.
What's that?
The Big Black River is actually a navigable stream, at least so declared by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. The head of navigation on the Big Black used to be a town called Amsterdam, and it was classified as an international port. In fact, it's never been declassified, so it's still an international port today, although it doesn't even exist. The town of Amsterdam, as we start making this bend, was on your right, and the Big Black River is in the woods just to your right here. This is the area of the town of Amsterdam. There's not a trace of it at all today. But But Amsterdam would fall into decay beginning with the advent of the railroad, because once the railroad was constructed in the 1830s and the bridge was built across the Big Black River off to your left front, steamboats couldn't get under the railroad bridge.
Oh,
Which brought
wow.
an end to Amsterdam. The Bonner Campbell Institute here on your left, this is a black Bible college. It's been around for quite a number of years. It has its own history. Back during the integration days of the 1960s, some of the Freedom Riders were secreted in these buildings here for their own protection. Now we're at the Big Black. The Big Black is on your right. We're paralleling the river at this point. Just off to your right are two ferries known as Hooker's Ferry and Coker's Ferry. These two ferries would be utilized by the men of the 17th Army Corps under James McPherson to bridge and cross the river. The Battle of Big Black River Bridge, fought on May the 17th, will be fought in its entirety by the 13th Army Corps. McClernand's Corps is in the lead, advancing along this road. The 17th Corps is traveling in its wake. But before the 17th Corps can even reach the field of battle, the battle has been fought and won. Consequently, Grant will order his army to bridge the river in several different areas. Sherman will be laying the pontoon bridge at Bridgeport. McPherson will be bridging the stream here at Hooker's and Coker's ferries. And he does it in a rather novel way. Of course, you might imagine he was an engineer. So he puts his engineering talents to use. And what he does is he tears down several gin houses and takes the cotton that is inside in bales and uses the wood to make a frame around cotton bales. And he throws the cotton bales with these wooden frames into the river and lashes them together. So you had a floating bridge made of cotton bales strong enough to support the Army's artillery train and wagons. Now just up ahead, you'll be able to see the high ground on the west side of the Big Black River come into view. That is the high ground on which John Pemberton had initially wanted to dig in and meet Grant's attack. You can see here on the Hinds County side of the river, the ground is relatively flat. It would have provided Pemberton with good fields of fire, a strong defensive position, an unfordable river in his front. I think if you look in hindsight, Pemberton's idea wasn't half bad. But he allows himself to be talked out of it and moves beyond the river to disaster. George, when we reach this next building on your right up there, let's begin slowing down a little bit so I can talk about the battle before we stop. Okay? Folks, we are moving into what historically was known as Smith's Station. It's around here at Smith's Station where the lead elements of McClernand's 13th Army Corps catch their first view of the Confederates and the fortifications here on the west side of Big Black River Bridge and realize that the Confederates are going to put up resistance on this side of the river. In this vicinity, as we come up to this next building on our right and left, that's Smith Station. That's the area where McClernand will begin deploying his troops from column formation into line of battle. He will also at this point call up his artillery, which will drop trail in this area and bring under fire the Confederate fortifications to our front. Those buildings on your left are along the river, and so again we are paralleling the stream, but we have open fields for the Federals to deploy their troops in. You see the railroad off to your left. Again, that is the original alignment of the Southern Railroad of Mississippi that leads back into Vicksburg. Okay, here we are at Smith Station. As you look through the gap of the trees in your front, you see the high ground on the west side of the Big Black. You might catch sight of the steel structure of the bridge across the river. On this side of that is the Confederate defense line. So in this area, McClernand deploys his troops in line of battle. As the Federals deploy in the line of battle, their right flank will be extended until it reaches the river, which is at the tree line on your right. They will extend here through the fields on your left over the railroad and continue on to the next wood line beyond. The Federals will deploy virtually the entire 13th Army Corps over a broad front. They will bring up their artillery and begin shelling the Confederate troops. It is hoped that by shelling the troops, especially going over and shelling behind them, that you'll lock the Confederates in position long enough for Sherman to lay the pontoon train and cross over the river farther to your right. As the battle unfolds, however, a brigade of Iowans, primarily led by General Michael Lawler, the biggest general in the Army, and by that I mean a big 300-pounder. He was so large that he couldn't put a sword around his waist. He had to carry it slung over his shoulder. But Big Mike Lawler was a fighting Irishman, and absolutely nothing was going to stop him on this day.
Okay, let's continue on.
Just up ahead here on the left, see that tall tree, that big tall oak? That's another witness tree to the Vicksburg Campaign. It's known as the Battle Oak. Unfortunately, it got struck by lightning just a few years ago. About fully one half of that tree was destroyed. But that's the Battle Oak right there. Look how wide that thing is at its base.
Cool. Yeah.
It was a truly magnificent tree. Truly magnificent. Lawler's brigade of Iowans will pass by this cluster of trees on your right, using it as a shield, and redeploy close to the river on the other side there. There was a meander scar. There was a meander scar just north of us here, deep enough and wide enough for Lawler's troops to actually form in defilade. Could not be hit by the enemy, and from that area they will launch their attack.
What was it? Blue herring?
Heron. Gee.
There's no good place to stop here at the Big Black River, unfortunately. So we're going to stop right here on the road. In most cases, this road is not that heavily traveled, but I guarantee the second we get out, it's going to be like Grand Central Station. So we may have to put a road guard at either end here. But we're going to get out this side of the bus, walk across the road onto the gravel you see over here. That'll give us a good secure place off the road to talk about the battle. Now again, that's the Big Black River on your right where you see those structures. At the far end over here, you see that little structure in the corner, the far corner over there? That's in the vicinity of that meander scar that we'll be talking about. That's where Lawler's brigade would deploy in line of battle. The Confederate defense perimeter has all been obliterated by flood over the years and agricultural practices, but this short tree line you see immediately in our front, that very first tree line, that is the Confederate defense line at Big Black River Bridge. So keep those landmarks in mind, if you will, as we begin our discussion. Map, head on out.
Good ground, G?
Very good ground, Carl. Very good ground. I labeled your next 5 takes.
Yeah.
But you didn't have anyone labeled.
Hey, look at that doggy.
From Edwards, along what historically was known as the Jackson Road, we reached the area of Smith Station, which was right here. You can see the trees off to your right and rear. That's this cluster of trees at this point. In front of you, that very first line of low growth is the Confederate defense line. The Confederate defense line consisted of a parapet of earth and cotton bales extending from the Big Black River on your right, across the railroad, which you see on your left, and anchored on Gin Lake. You can't see Gin Lake from this particular point, but you can see both flanks are anchored on bodies of water, and the entire front is covered by a slough of roughly waist-deep water. And in front of it, in certain areas, the Confederates had felled what few trees there were, forming an abattis, or an obstruction of felled trees. Now, these fortifications were constructed in response to Grierson's raid in April of 1863, just a month prior to this battle. You recall that Grierson, having severed the Southern Railroad at Newton, continued in a southwesterly direction. It was believed by the Confederate authorities that his next objective would be this railroad bridge across the Big Black River. As we mentioned, you knock that bridge out, you have disabled this railroad permanently. Or as Rocky Balboa's trainer would say, permanently. Permanently. But Grierson does not go for this. It's just too heavily guarded. But to safeguard this bridge from Grierson's raiders, the Confederates construct this line of fortifications. That's why the fortifications are on the east side of the Big Black River. Now, knowing these fortifications are in position, knowing that this bridge is the only avenue of escape across the Big Black, General John Pemberton orders Bowen's Confederate division, although badly mauled and greatly reduced in numbers after their fighting at Grand Gulf, Port Gibson, and Champion Hill, to move into these fortifications. He has also ordered up from the Vicksburg fortifications a brigade of infantry. That brigade will be a brigade of Tennesseans commanded by General John Vaughn. They will move into position before Bowen does. As a result, these Tennesseans will be astride the road here in the very center of the Confederate defense line. Now, what makes these Tennesseans unique is the fact that these are all East Tennesseans. They are mountain Republicans by and large. Many of these individuals voted for Abraham Lincoln for President of the United States. But as their state seceded from the Union and they were conscripted in the Confederate service, here they are on May the 17th in Confederate gray. And I can assure you that their heart is not in this fight at all. As a result, when Bowen's division falls back, he will have to split his division. Greene's brigade of Arkansans will be here on the Confederate left, anchored on the Big Black River. Cockrell's brigade of Missourians will be on the other side of the railroad, anchoring the line from the railroad onto Gin Lake. So that's the alignment of the Confederate forces. Bowen's division is greatly reduced in numbers. I don't think there are more than 4,000 Confederate soldiers, maybe 4,500 at most, in the defensive works here at the Big Black River. Now again, Pemberton's intention on holding this bridge is just long enough for Loring to cross. Does that help? There you go.
Oh, there you go.
Is long enough for Loring to cross. He is unaware of the fact that Loring has been cut off and is not following in the Army's wake. Thus, on the morning of May the 17th, as the rising sun exposes the field for all to see, Loring does not arrive, rather the lead elements of the 13th Army Corps led by General John McClernand. The lead elements of the Union Army, as they push along the Jackson Road, come to this gap in the trees where they can see the Confederate fortifications looming in their front and the gleam of bayonets in the distance. They realize the Confederates are going to fight for this position. But McClernand's initial intention is not so much to overwhelm these men, but rather hold them in place. Keep them pinned to these works long enough for Sherman to cross the river off to our north, get around behind the Confederates and cut this road, bagging the entire number of Confederates. But as the Federals deploy into line of battle, you will see Michael Lawler's brigade here, moving forward through this gap in the trees parallel to the river, and Lawler will move his troops for their own protection into a meander scar. Now, a meander scar is simply an old channel of the river. The river is constantly changing its course, and so it moves slightly, leaving a meander scar, a deep ravine. If you look off to your right front, and allow me to expose your eyes here. If you look off to the right front, you see that bare dirt in the distance. You see the depression in the ground. That's your meander scar. And so Lawler's men will race across the fields and into this meander scar, where his 4 regiments will deploy in double line of battle. While his troops are deploying in this line, Union artillery, of course, is unlimbering along the front and opening fire, keeping the Confederates pinned to their works. General McClernand is on the field. General Grant himself arrives in person. While General Grant is here conferring with McClernand, up comes that courier with a note from the War Department and General Halleck. instructing him to move to the assistance of General Banks at Port Hudson. General Grant quickly scans that note, crumples it up, and throws it to the ground and says, "I don't think this is pertinent any longer." It is just about that time when suddenly a mighty cheer is heard coming from the Federal right. It is Lawler's men letting go with a mighty huzzah! And as they pour out of this meander scar and start racing across the field, Grant turns to McClernand and demands to know who has authorized this charge. And of course McClernand hadn't done so. He has this blank look on his face, but it didn't matter because they realized this was Big Mike Lawler as the big 300-pounder came mounted on horseback out of that meander scar, and everybody realized that this is Lawler acting on his own initiative. But when Big Mike Lawler got his dandruff up and went off to war, he was gonna fight. The men of Lawler's brigade move across the Confederate front, coming actually toward the road, if you will, that we're now standing on, and then turn, go through that abattis of felled trees, wade through the waist-deep slough, and slam into the Confederate line. Lawler has instructed his men not to fire. In fact, they do not even load their weapons. They are instructed to advance at the point of bayonet and carry the works at the point of bayonet. Thanks for holding that. Thankfully, luckily for Lawler's men, the area that they hit the Confederate line just happens to be that very spot manned by the East Tennesseans, the Mountain Republicans. Seeing this brigade of Union troops advancing on them with the cold steel shining in the sun, many of these Tennesseans break and run without firing a shot. Others immediately start pulling out chunks of cotton from the cotton bale barricades, run them through their bayonets, and frantically wave them as a symbol of surrender. In just 3 minutes' time, 3 minutes' time, from the time they pour out of this meander scar, Lawler's men are through the slough, over the tops of the works, and have pierced the Confederate line.